Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. We don't want to be here anymore, we're done. So is he asking you to kill him? I just don't understand. Yeah, that's what I've been doing for a while and I can't get him to stop breathing. He's going to be 18 tomorrow. But he didn't want to turn 18. This boy never got the chance to turn 18 because his own mother made sure of that. Just hours before he was supposed to step into adulthood, she picked up the phone and called 911, but instead of crying for help she delivered a chilling statement, and that is she couldn't get him to stop breathing. Most mothers would fight tooth and nail to keep their child alive, but this one, she did the exact opposite, and it makes you wonder what kind of mother does something so unthinkable, and how did it come to this? To even try to understand how this all happened, we have to go back to where it started, to a quiet little apartment complex that by all accounts should have been just another ordinary place to live. Baypoint Apartments, sitting at 791 East 16th Street in Holland, Michigan, a place meant to be a home, a safe haven, a spot where people came back after a long day, kicked off their shoes and settled into the comfort of their lives. The Baypoint Apartments community wasn't just some rundown complex, it featured 1 and 2 bedroom units along with 2 bedroom lofts. Residents had access to central heating and air conditioning, washer and dryer hookups in select apartments, and even a large swimming pool to cool off in the summer. It was a pet-friendly place. 2 cats and dogs were welcome, adding to the sense of home for those who lived there. On the surface it was just another suburban apartment complex, the kind of place where people went about their business without too much drama, and among those residents were Katie Lee and her son Austin Picker, just a small family trying to make it through life like everyone else. From the outside they seemed normal enough. Austin was a quiet, intelligent teenager with a deep love for books, science and video games. He wasn't the kind of kid who got into trouble. If anything, he was the opposite: smart, reserved, a bit of a dreamer. And Katie, she was a single mother who had spent years raising him on her own. Life wasn't easy, but they had each other. Neighbors didn't see anything too out of the ordinary. They weren't a loud, troublesome family. They kept to themselves, blended into the background of their small Michigan town. If you passed them on the street you probably wouldn't have thought twice, but behind closed doors where no neighbors could see, where no friendly hellos could catch the truth, something was brewing, something dark, something no one saw coming. For years Austin and his mom had an unusually close relationship. Some might even say it was too close. Friends recall that Katie was overprotective, treating Austin like a child. Even as he inched closer to adulthood, she had a hard time letting go, clinging to him like he was all she had in the world. And in a way, he was. Austin's father wasn't in the picture much, and Katie had no other children. It was just the two of them against the world, until apparently it wasn't. At first Austin didn't seem to mind his mother's tight grip on his life, but as he got older things changed. He wanted freedom, independence. He wanted to make his own choices. He was on the verge of turning 18, officially an adult, free to do whatever he pleased. Maybe he'd go off to college, maybe he'd get a job and move out, maybe he'd start a life of his own, one that didn't revolve around his mother. And that, it seems, is where things took a deadly turn. Sometime in the early hours of February 21st, 2025, just one day before Austin's 18th birthday, Katie Lee picked up the phone and dialed 911, but instead of the usual panic or desperation you'd expect in an emergency call, her words were cold, eerie, almost robotic. She told the dispatcher she couldn't get her son to stop breathing. To the apartment she shared with her son Austin. Let that sink in for a second. Not that he wasn't breathing, not that he was in distress, but that she couldn't get him to stop. When police arrived at the Baypoint apartment complex, they found a scene straight out of a nightmare. Austin was dead. His throat had been slashed and he had multiple stab wounds on his arms, wounds that according to experts looked suspiciously like defensive wounds, as if he had fought back, as if he hadn't wanted to die. Katie, standing at the doorway with a knife still in her hands, didn't resist arrest, but she didn't surrender easily either. She allegedly made a threatening move toward the Officers forcing them to deploy a taser before taking her into custody. Once she was down, she reportedly told investigators she had hoped the police would kill her so she could be with her son. Then the details got even darker. According to police reports, Katie and Austin had attempted to take their own lives together by overdosing on medication the previous day, but when Austin passed out and the overdose failed, Katie took matters into her own hands. Literally, she grabbed the knife and slashed his throat while he lay unconscious, a brutal, irreversible act. The most baffling part of this case isn't just that a mother murdered her son, it's why she claims she did it. According to Katie, Austin didn't want to turn 18. He was afraid of adulthood, of growing up. He couldn't handle the idea of becoming an adult. But let's be real here, how many teenagers actually feel this way? Sure, some fear the responsibilities that come with adulthood, but let's not pretend turning 18 is some kind of death sentence for most kids. That milestone is something to celebrate. It means freedom. It means being able to buy a lottery ticket, legally get a tattoo, vote, maybe even move out on their own. If Katie's claims were true, it would mean Austin had been suicidal. But was he? Had he actually begged his mother to help him stop breathing, or was this just her twisted way of justifying the unthinkable? And even if he had been feeling suicidal, why wouldn't a mother seek help for her child instead of taking matters into her own hands? Why wouldn't she do everything in her power to prevent his death rather than cause it? The pieces just don't add up. For days later, Katie Lee appeared in court. Her face was stained with tears and she could barely contain her sobs as she sat before the judge. Her shoulders shook uncontrollably, her body trembling as though the weight of everything had finally crashed down on her. For the entire 10-minute hearing she wept, gasping between sobs, her emotions so raw that it almost seemed like she was just now realizing what she had done. Good afternoon, are you Katie? Austin Lee: yes. Can you hear me? All right, Miss Lee. Yes, all right, I'm Judge Null and I'm arraigning you from the District Court in Holland. This is file 251-61055. But if she thought her tears would earn her sympathy, she was gravely mistaken. Judge Bradley Null was unmoved. His expression remained hard, unreadable, and his decision was swift and absolute. No bond. Katie wouldn't be walking free anytime soon. Perhaps it was the right call considering her behavior when officers first arrived at the scene. She hadn't just cooperated meekly when they found her. No, she had allegedly threatened them, her grief and anger manifesting as violence, a knife still in her hands. She hadn't wanted to let go of it. She hadn't wanted to surrender, and now here she was, her fate slipping further and further out of her control. Even in court, her defiance hadn't disappeared entirely. She resisted the public defender's office, refusing legal representation at first, as though she could take on this case alone. But reality wasn't something she could ignore. After several minutes of back and forth of whispered conversations and quiet pleas from those trying to help her, she finally gave in with a hollow nod. She agreed to let them assign her a public defender. It was the only choice she had left. But the real shock of the day wasn't Katie's sobs, nor was it the judge's unwavering stance. The most jaw-dropping moment didn't come from Katie at all. It came from her family. They were still there, standing by her, supporting her even after everything. They hadn't abandoned her. As the hearing came to a close, as the judge gave his final words and the proceedings were wrapped up, voices from the courtroom rose, breaking through the heavy silence, saying, "We love you, Katie." However, the legal battle ahead is grim. Katie Lee is facing an open murder charge, which means the jury will be the ones to decide what degree of murder she is guilty of. If they determine she acted with premeditation, if they believe she planned her son's death beforehand, then she will be convicted of first-degree murder, a charge that could lead to life in prison. But if the jury finds that she acted in the heat of the moment without prior planning, then she will be convicted of second-degree murder. Either way, the result is the same. Austin is gone and Katie Lee will pay the price. But her troubles don't end there. On top of the murder charge, she's also facing a charge of resisting and obstructing an officer. When police arrived at the scene, she allegedly waved a knife at them, her behavior erratic and aggressive. It was as if she had no intention of making things easy, not for herself, not for law enforcement, not for anyone. No official trial date has been set yet, but when it does happen, it won't just be another case for the books. This trial will be something people won't forget. It will be a long, painful process for everyone involved. Austin's friends, who are still Trying to make sense of his sudden and brutal death, his extended family who now have to live with a nightmare they never imagined, and even the outsiders, the true crime followers who consume these cases daily but still find themselves shaken by this one, because no matter how many stories we hear about parents killing their children, this one feels different. This one feels personal, and the biggest question remains why did Katie Lee do this? What could possibly make a mother take her own child's life? The explanation she allegedly gave, that Austin didn't want to live past 17, is chilling. It's the kind of statement that makes you pause, that makes you wonder if you heard it correctly. There is no known history of suicidal thoughts. No evidence has surfaced that suggests he struggled with depression. No close friends or relatives have come forward to say that he had been unhappy. If anything, Austin's future seemed bright. He loved science, he loved space, he had dreams and aspirations, ideas of who he wanted to become. So why would he suddenly wish to throw all of that away? And then there's the possibility of money. Follow the money, that's what investigators always say. Did she have a life insurance policy on Austin? Could there have been something to gain financially from his death? Nothing has been confirmed yet, but it's a question worth asking. People have killed for far less. If Katie stood to benefit financially, then suddenly this case takes on an even darker edge. Or was the answer something even more terrifying? Was mental illness at play? Did she suffer from delusions? Did she believe she was saving Austin? There have been cases before where people, often suffering from severe psychological disorders, convince themselves that killing their loved ones is an act of mercy. Did Katie truly believe Austin was better off dead? Did she think she was doing him a favor? And what about drugs? Could she have been under the influence? Drug use can explain erratic behavior, paranoia, aggression, but here's the most horrifying part: no toxicology reports have been mentioned, which means that as of now there is no evidence that Katie was high when she did this, and that makes it so much worse, because if she wasn't in some drug-induced haze, if she wasn't under the influence of anything, then that means she did it completely sober. It means she made this choice with a clear mind. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of this entire case is the reaction from Katie's family. How does one rationalize standing by a family member after something like this? How do you look at a woman who has done something so unspeakable and still say, "We love you"? Is it denial, a refusal to accept reality, or is it something deeper? A kind of unconditional love that defies logic. Some families cut ties immediately, unable to stomach the betrayal. Others cling to the past, unable to let go of the person they once knew. But at some point reality has to set in. At some point they will have to ask themselves, if Katie Lee could do this to Austin, who's to say she wouldn't have done it to someone else? Who's to say she wouldn't do it again? At the heart of this case is a single devastating truth: Katie Lee failed her son in the worst way imaginable. A mother is supposed to protect her child, to keep them safe, to be their shield against the horrors of the world. Instead, Katie became the monster her son should have been protected from. And the worst part, we may never fully understand why. No matter how many hearings take place, no matter how many psychological evaluations are conducted, one voice will never be heard: Austin's. And that is the real tragedy. The remaining family is doing everything they can to keep Austin's memory alive. They even created a GoFundMe in his honor, hoping to give him the kind of send-off he deserves. The organizer, Elisa Part, didn't go into details about what really happened, but one thing is clear: they want the world to remember Austin for the bright, loving person he was, not the way his life ended. She described him as caring, funny, and full of life. He loved his family and friends more than anything, but if there was one thing that truly fascinated him, it was space. Galaxies, planets, the unknown. He loved it all, and now his family has come up with a plan that feels almost poetic. Instead of a traditional burial, they want to send his ashes into space on an actual rocket ship. It's the kind of farewell that matches his dreams, making sure that even in death he reaches for the stars. Of course, losing someone like this isn't just emotionally devastating, it comes with financial struggles too. Funerals, memorials, and everything in between add up fast. Elisa said that some people have already reached out asking how they can help, and honestly the best way right now is through donations. Every little bit helps as they work toward their goal of celebrating Austin's life the way he would have wanted. So far the GoFundMe has raised over $6,000, but they're hoping to reach $12,000. It's not just about money, it's about giving Austin a proper goodbye one that honors the person he was. Meanwhile, Katie Lee is sitting in jail facing some of the most serious charges imaginable. Open murder, resisting an officer, no bond. She's not going anywhere anytime soon. And if she's convicted, Michigan law could put her away for life. But here's the big question. Story 2. I search a young boy between 18 and 25-year-old. Have you a normal body? I butchering you and eat your horny flesh. This chilling post might sound like the stuff of horror fiction, but it's very real, and it led to a crime so shocking it made headlines around the world. What makes this case even more bizarre, the victim wasn't forced because he willingly agreed to be butchered and eaten. Now, before Jeffrey Dahmer shocked the world, there was Armin May West, the man known as the most respectful killer, a title that might sound strange, but once you hear the twisted details you'll understand why. And it all starts with his childhood. Because like many killers, his descent into darkness began long before the horrifying act itself. My name Armin May West. I was born 1961. I'm computer engineer from Rothenburg, Germany. I killed a man, slaughtered him and ate him. Since then he is always with me. Just as you've heard, Armin May West was born on December 1st, 1961, into a family that from the outside seemed to have it all. His father was a police officer holding a stable and respected job. With his steady income, Armin's father was able to provide a lavish lifestyle for the family, purchasing a sprawling 36-room mansion measuring 16,000 square feet in Germany. It was a home that symbolizes wealth, success, and the kind of life that many would envy. However, within the walls of that grand mansion, the reality of the family's life was far from ideal. Armin's parents had a significant age gap. His mother was 40 when she married his father, who was only 21 at the time. This large difference in age set the tone for an uneven and troubled relationship. Armin later described his mother as extremely controlling, manipulative, and deeply possessive. She was frequently jealous and constantly accused her husband of cheating. Armin believed his mother had intentionally gotten pregnant with him, not out of a natural desire for a child, but as a strategy to prevent his father from leaving her. According to Armin, she didn't want a baby, she wanted to keep her husband. As Armin grew, he experienced the emotional toll of living in a home filled with tension. His mother's controlling behavior took a heavy toll on the family dynamic, with constant fights between his parents. These arguments would often escalate to the point where Armin's mother would threaten to kill herself or even harm him if things didn't go her way. This toxic environment created a great deal of stress and instability for Armin, who at a young age had to navigate an emotionally suffocating atmosphere. Armin was the youngest of 3 children, and as he grew older, the dysfunction in the home only worsened. His 2 older siblings, overwhelmed by the toxicity of their parents' relationship, decided to leave the family home when Armin was only about 5 or 6 years old. They were older teenagers, and they simply couldn't take it anymore. With their departure, Armin was left alone with his increasingly distant and cold mother. The absence of his siblings left him feeling even more isolated, abandoned not just by them but also by his father, who would soon leave as well. When Armin was just 7 years old, his father left the family for good. One day, without warning or explanation, his father packed up and left, getting into his car and driving off, never to return. This abandonment was devastating for Armin, who had already lost his siblings and now found himself without a father. The emotional weight of these departures, of being left behind by those he should have been able to rely on, created a deep sense of loneliness that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the midst of all this turmoil, Armin's relationship with his mother remained distant and unloving. She showed no affection or care for him. If anything, she was cruel and demanding, expecting him to handle the household chores that were beyond a young boy's capacity. By the time Armin was 6 or 7, he was already responsible for maintaining the household, while his mother barely contributed. She yelled at him regularly, creating an environment where he felt invisible and unloved. There was no warmth or tenderness in his home, only an overwhelming sense of neglect. To cope with the emotional turmoil he was experiencing, Armin turned to books. He found comfort in reading, and one of the books he became fixated on was Robinson Crusoe. This classic novel, while mainly about survival and adventure, contained a Brief passage that would leave a lasting impact on Armin in the story. There is a reference to cannibalism, a detail that captured his attention in a way he couldn't shake. At the age of just 10 years old, Armin found himself obsessing over the idea of eating another person. This morbid fascination marked the beginning of his dark and twisted desires. It wasn't just curiosity, it was an obsession that would define his life. Now this fascination wouldn't come to life so soon. You see, when Armin was 19 years old, he left home and joined the West German Army, hoping to build a future as a professional soldier. He spent 12 years in the armed forces, a time when he felt a sense of normalcy that helped hold his darker thoughts at bay. During his time in the army, he made some friendships with women, but none of them went beyond the surface. Armin began to question his own sexuality and would sometimes ask his friends, "Do you think I'm gay?" And his friends would respond, "That's something you need to figure out for yourself." One of his friends later mentioned that everyone seemed to know Armin might be gay, but he was the last to realize it, or maybe he just didn't understand it at the time. Armin's confusion led him to start drinking more heavily. His alcohol abuse resulted in 2 car accidents, both of which were caused by him driving while intoxicated. After these incidents, he was kicked out of the army at the age of 32. Armin moved back home to care for his ailing mother. She was much older now, struggling with illness and unable to take care of herself. Although she had never been very independent, Armin's return to the house meant he would be the one to look after her. In the large mansion they lived in, a place that once seemed full of tension and coldness. It was also during this time that Armin decided to change careers. He became a computer engineer and found success in his new job working for a bank. However, the 1990s would soon introduce him to something that would change everything: the World Wide Web. Back then the internet was new and websites were often crude and unregulated. This lack of supervision would soon play a crucial role in Armin's growing obsession. As Armin began exploring the internet, he stumbled upon something he wasn't expecting: a community of people who shared his strange and dark interest, cannibalism. This online forum, known as Cannibal Cafe, allowed individuals with cannibalistic fantasies to meet and discuss their desires freely. For Armin, finding this community was both a shock and a relief. Finally, he wasn't alone. There were others who shared his twisted thoughts, and for the first time he felt understood. The internet with its uncensored space blurred the line between fantasy and reality. Armin, eager to explore his desires further, created his own website where he could openly talk about cannibalism. He even began making fake images to fuel the fantasies of both himself and others in the community. Now, if you're thinking about searching it up, just a spoiler, the website isn't available anymore. However, if you use the Wayback Machine, the school tool that allows you to browse old websites that have since vanished, you can still catch glimpses of what it once was. Although most of the site is gone, you won't find any of Armin's posts from that era. After things took a dark turn, his contributions were scrubbed, but it was essentially a forum, a place where people openly posted about their darkest fantasies. Users shared thoughts like, "I want to eat your flesh," or "I can't wait to kill this person and devour them." Disturbingly, such posts were not uncommon. It was in this disturbing corner of the web that Armin, with his twisted desires, found a way to connect with others who shared his grotesque fantasies. Instead of simply talking about it, Armin decided to take matters into his own hands. Quite literally, he visited butcher shops, bought real meat, and manipulated it to resemble human body parts. With a mix of sickening creativity and an eerie desire to be seen as a real cannibal, he photographed his creations and posted them online, painting a horrifying picture of murder and consumption. Many were fooled. They believed his gruesome posts and began to idolize him. After all, in a space where fantasies ran wild, Armin seemed all too real. His online persona gained traction as he continued to manipulate the forum, slowly building a reputation among the site's users as the man who was actually living out his darkest urges. But on the 2nd of September 1999, Armin's life took a new turn. He came home from work, entered his mother's bedroom, and discovered her lifeless body. Most people would have been filled with grief or sadness, but not Armin. Instead, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For years, his mother had controlled his life, manipulating him with her possessive and abusive behavior. Without his mother's judgment and control, he felt free to fully indulge in his depraved fantasies. No longer confined by her presence, he took his obsession to the next level. One of the rooms in the house was transformed into his cannibal room, a place where he could live out his twisted dreams in private, untouched by any societal norms or restrictions. What followed was a descent into madness as Armin began to seek out others who were willing to fulfill his darkest desires, and that post you saw on the intro, that was the beginning of it all. Surprisingly, Armin received numerous responses from people expressing interest, but most of them would back out at the last moment. However, one man stood out and was determined to follow through. This man, whose name remains unknown, continued emailing Armin back and forth, expressing a deep interest in Armin's bizarre and horrifying fantasy. In their exchanges, he openly admitted that it was his fantasy to be eaten. Armin, presumably intrigued, responded positively, arranging a meeting at his house. When the man arrived at Armin's mansion, he was greeted by a grim scene. Armin had set the stage for his dark intentions, laying the man out on a table while explaining step by step what was about to unfold. But in a sudden shift, the man admitted that he wasn't feeling well and no longer wanted to go through with the ordeal. To Armin's surprise, he allowed the man to get up, leave and return home. Armin was clearly disappointed, but his primary desire was to find someone willing to participate. He didn't want to force anyone into the horrific situation he had planned, and if you think about it, that man was fortunate, as Armin wasn't entirely consumed by his madness and the situation didn't escalate further. Armin, however, was undeterred, still determined to create the illusion of fulfilling his grotesque fantasy. He resorted to a disturbing form of creativity. He crafted a lilac body out of paper mache, painting it to resemble a real human form. Additionally, he acquired an old mannequin from a store that was being discarded, painted it to resemble a dead body, and photographed the result. Armin then posted these images on the cannibal website, further fueling his online notoriety. The site's users were enthralled, believing that Armin had actually killed and consumed a person. They hailed him as a hero, a true embodiment of the cannibalistic fantasy. They all shared his fame within the cannibal community grew, with many users idolizing him for what they believed to be his gruesome deeds. Despite these online theatrics, Armin's desire to find a willing participant never wavered. He continued his search and prepared for the day when he would find someone willing to die for his twisted purpose. One of the rooms in his mansion was transformed into what he referred to as his slaughter room. This room was devoid of windows, with a cage to hold his victims and meat hooks hanging from the ceiling, an ominous setup reminiscent of something straight out of a horror movie. And finally, Armin's persistence paid off when he received a response from a man named Brandeis. Brandeis, a 34-year-old engineer, had been married but had recently separated from his wife after revealing that he was curious about exploring relationships with men. His inner turmoil over his sexuality had likely caused strain within his marriage, and his wife's departure left him to confront his desires alone. Brandeis, too, had been active on the cannibal forums and expressed a willingness to participate in Armin's horrific fantasy. The two exchanged numerous emails, during which Armin detailed what he intended to do with Brandeis' body once the act was completed. Brandeis in turn proposed his own ideas, requesting that his skull be used as an ashtray after his death. In a deeply disturbing exchange, he also asked for his penis to be severed and for both men to partake in eating it together. Armin, who would later discuss his motivations in interviews, insisted that he never wanted to violate the wishes of his volunteers. If someone wanted to be consumed in a particular way, he was more than willing to accommodate their request. His twisted sense of respect dictated that every detail should align with his victim's desires, and after weeks of correspondence, a date was set. March 9, 2001. Brandeis would travel to Armin's home, where the two would carry out their unthinkable plan. Upon his arrival, they engaged in sexual relations. Before proceeding with the preparations, Armin, intent on minimizing Brandeis's pain, provided him with sleeping pills, alcohol and even Vicks, believing that this combination would dull any suffering. Brandeis accepted these substances willingly, fully aware of what was to come. Armin also informed him that the entire process would be recorded, a way for him to relieve the experience long after it was over, with the camera positioned and ready to capture Everything Brandeis lay down on the table. Armin, staying true to the agreement, began with the act Brandeis had requested. With a sharp blade he severed the man's genitalia. In later interviews, Armin described how Brandeis let out a horrific scream, but only for about 20 to 30 seconds. Blood sprayed from the wound, resembling a fountain, an image that would be forever burned into Armin's memory. But the night's horrors were far from over. Armin, still adhering to Brandeis' wishes, took the severed organ to the kitchen. There he attempted to prepare it as a meal. With meticulous care he seasoned it with garlic, salt and pepper before placing it in a pan with oil. The surreal nature of the moment was not lost on him, nor would it be lost on the investigators, who would later uncover the grim details of this crime. After attempting to cook the severed organ, Armin plated it neatly, serving it to both himself and Brandeis, but the experience was not what he had imagined. The flesh was incredibly tough and nearly impossible to chew. Disappointed, Armin admitted that it tasted horrible, chewy, rubbery, and just not what he expected. Meanwhile, Brandeis was bleeding heavily and the mess was getting out of control. To contain it, Armin moved him to the bathtub, thinking the running water would help. Every 15 minutes he checked on Brandeis, expecting him to pass quickly, but the process was taking much longer than he thought. Time dragged on, and as he waited he picked up a Star Trek novel to pass the time. Even as he read, Brandeis was still alive, slowly fading away. After nearly 3 hours, Armin decided to speed things up. He walked into the bathroom, looked at Brandeis and simply said, "Sorry, but you're taking too long." He kissed him, then slit his throat. With Brandeis dead, Armin got to work. He dragged the body out of the tub, chopped it into pieces and carefully stored different parts in his freezer. The skull, however, was given a separate resting place. It was buried in his garden. The rest of the remains were wrapped and preserved for later meals. In an interview, Armin described how he carefully set the table, lighting candles and using his finest dinner ware. He prepared a piece of meat from Brandeis' back, frying it with princess potatoes and Brussels sprouts. For the next 6 to 8 months, Armin lived off Brandeis' remains, storing the pieces in his freezer under stacks of pizza boxes. He ate the meat in different ways, sometimes frying it, sometimes using it as a pizza topping, even having it for breakfast. But eating wasn't enough. He needed validation. He returned to the cannibal forums and uploaded photos of Brandeis' remains, showing off his achievement to the dark corners of the internet. His posts sparked excitement among others on the site, and they showered him with admiration. By late November or early December, he found himself running low on his supply of human meat, which he had been consuming for several months. Wanting a fresh victim, he returned to the cannibal websites, posting advertisements for a new volunteer. However, his online activity caught the attention of an Austrian student who stumbled upon Armin's posts and the disturbing images he had shared. Realizing that this wasn't just a fantasy, the student tipped off the police, telling them, "I think this guy actually killed someone." So on the morning of December 10, 2002, police arrived at Armin's mansion. As they searched the house, they initially found nothing unusual. However, when they opened the freezer hidden beneath stacks of pizza boxes, they discovered 50 pounds of meat. Armin calmly told them it was wild pig, but upon closer inspection, officers noticed something shocking. The flesh still had human skin attached. Confronted with the truth, Armin didn't try to hide anything. He confessed immediately, admitting everything he had done, even handing over his computer, the photos and the VHS tape documenting the crime. The police arrested him on the spot, and as the case unfolded, the details horrified the public. On January 30, 2004, Armin was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to only 8.5 years in prison. This sparked outrage, as many believed the punishment was far too lenient. However, his defense was unusual but strong. Brandeis had willingly participated, as proven by the emails and the fact that he had traveled to Armin's home voluntarily. This case exposed a shocking legal loophole in Germany. Cannibalism was not technically illegal. With public pressure mounting, prosecutors pushed for a retrial, arguing that Brandeis was not in a stable state of mind to consent to his own death. On May 10, 2006, Armin was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Since then, Armin has undergone a surprising transformation. While serving his sentence, he became a vegetarian. Rejecting meat altogether, he has also given multiple interviews which are easily found online where he speaks calmly and articulately about his crimes. Watching him you wouldn't suspect he was a murderer, but if there's one thing true crime has taught us, it's that killers often look completely normal. Armin has acknowledged that what he did was wrong, but the damage was already done, and his case remains one of the most disturbing in modern history. Story 3. Imagine sending your child to school only to receive their dead body the next day, and when the truth comes to light, the entire world tries to protect the culprit. This was the reality for Kendrick Johnson's family, from the discovery of his body in a gym mat to the shocking revelation of his missing organs during his exhumation. This case is horrific as it gets, and every detail seems to raise more questions than answers. Kendrick Johnson was born in October 1995 to Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson. As the youngest of his siblings, he was the heart of his family, the light that filled their home. His mother described him as the joy of their lives, a boy with an easy smile and a natural charm. He was fiercely athletic, a rising star in both football and basketball. Science and math came easily to him, and he had a gift for numbers, effortlessly keeping track of allowances in his head. But above all, Kendrick had dreams, big unstoppable dreams of making it as a professional football player. However, on January 11, 2013, those dreams were silenced forever. 17-year-old Kendrick was discovered in a way no one could have imagined. His lifeless body twisted unnaturally inside a rolled-up wrestling mat in the gymnasium of Lown High School, also known as LHS, in Valdosta, Georgia. His feet stuck out from the top, his head buried deep within the coil, as though the mat itself had swallowed him whole. It was a grotesque, baffling sight. Authorities were quick to explain it away. The Lown County Sheriff's Office ruled his death an accident, claiming Kendrick had fallen inside the mat while reaching for a pair of sneakers. The Georgia Bureau of Investigations, also known as GBI, conducted an autopsy, concluding his death was due to positional asphyxia. He had suffocated trapped upside down, but his parents, Jackie and Kenneth Johnson, knew better. Something was wrong, and then the horrifying details began to emerge. January 9, 2013, the first day back at school after the Christmas break, the students of LHS settled into routine. The school had two gymnasiums, an old one and a newer, larger one. In the dim, dusty corner of the old gym stood several large wrestling mats rolled tightly and stacked upright. Some students, including Kendrick, stored personal belongings inside the mats to avoid paying locker fees, but over the break more mats had been added, shifting the arrangement. LHS followed a block schedule, meaning classes alternated on different days. On Thursday, January 10, at exactly 1:30 p.m. grainy surveillance footage captured Kendrick walking into the old gym. However, he was never seen leaving. His next class was weightlifting, but he never arrived. Hours passed, the hallways emptied, the school day ended. He was supposed to come home after a freshman basketball game that evening, but he never did. Calls to his phone rang endlessly into silence. Midnight came. Jackie Johnson, his mother, could feel it in her bones. Something was terribly wrong, so just like any mother would do, she reported him missing. The next morning, January 11, Jackie Johnson arrived at the school, her heart pounding with dread. She pleaded with administrators, who printed missing person flyers. Time stretched unbearably thin. Then at approximately 10:30 a.m. inside the old gym, a group of female students sat on the top of the wrestling mats filling out surveys. They chatted absently when something caught their attention, a pair of socks barely visible peeking out from one of the rolled-up mats. One girl laughed, thinking it was a prank, but curiosity took the best of her. She climbed onto the bleachers, peering down into the mat, and what she saw sent ice through her veins. A body. The laughter stopped, the air grew thick, her scream broke the stillness of the gym. A male student rushed over, his hands trembling as he tried to pull Kendrick out. The moment he touched the body, he recoiled in horror. The stench of decomposition hit like a wave. It was clear that something terrible had happened here. A teacher sprinted forward. Together they knocked the mat over. Kendrick's body slumped forward, his face unrecognizable, growth squally swollen, his eyes frozen in a scream that never left his lips. The school erupted into chaos. Administrators ordered a lockdown. Students were ushered into the new gym, away from the nightmare unfolding in the Old one. Somewhere in the chaos Jackie Johnson's world was shattering. A voice delivered the words that would change her life forever. His body had been found. Kendrick had been there for 21 hours. Alone, suffocating in the dark. For Jackie and Kenneth Johnson, grief turned to horror when their son's body was exhumed for a second autopsy, because as it turns out his organs were missing, every single one: heart, lungs, liver, brain gone. In their place his body had been crudely stuffed with newspaper, a grotesque mockery of justice. The second autopsy revealed blunt force trauma, a direct contradiction to the official ruling of asphyxia. This will be explained later in the video. Someone had hurt Kendrick. Someone had covered it up, and yet the questions surrounding his death remain unanswered. Was Kendrick Johnson the victim of a tragic accident, or had he been silenced, murdered, hidden, erased? 10 years later the truth remains buried, but one thing is certain: somewhere someone knows what really happened. Lowndes County authorities moved quickly, questioning every student in the gym at the time Kendrick was found. Their stories aligned. A video was taken of the scene, capturing the eerie stillness of the gym, the blood pooling beneath Kendrick's head, the two pairs of shoes, one near his feet, the other beneath him, but something fell off. No blood was found outside the mat, none on the yellow folder or school book Kendrick had been carrying, none on the shoes he had been wearing. Old blood was discovered on a nearby column, but tests confirmed it didn't belong to Kendrick. In the girls' bathroom trash can, bloody tissues were found, which were traced back to a female student who had suffered a nosebleed, yet Kendrick's socks were partially pulled off his body, twisted in a way that defied simple explanation. The Johnson family refused to accept the ruling of accidental death. They sought help from civil rights organizations. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also known as SCC, and the NAACP stepped in. Protests erupted. Kendrick's parents were even arrested for civil disobedience outside the courthouse. The case was becoming larger than life, a battle against what they believed was a cover-up. With mounting pressure, the Department of Justice stepped in, launching its own investigation, but even that led to dead ends. Allegations swirled about two brothers, Brian and Brandon Bell, whose father was an FBI agent. The Johnsons publicly accused them, fueling further controversy, but an airtight alibi placed one of the boys out of state at the time of Kendrick's disappearance. The case grew murkier. The SCC and NAACP, once Kendrick's biggest advocates, turned away after their own investigations concluded that his death was in fact an accident. But his parents refused to accept that answer. Was Kendrick Johnson the victim of a tragic accident, or was his death covered up to protect someone? This case remains a mystery, two sides of a coin, each telling a different story. Kendrick Johnson was no stranger to the old gym at Lowndes High School. Like many students, he used the rolled-up wrestling mats as makeshift storage, tucking his shared pair of sneakers inside to avoid locker fees. It was a habit, one he had done countless times before. On January 10, 2013, surveillance cameras captured Kendrick walking into the gym alone. No one followed him, no one saw what happened next, but based on the physical evidence, investigators believe Kendrick's final moments unfolded in a tragic sequence of miscalculated movements. Standing at 5 feet 10 inches in, Kendrick reached for the mat containing his shoes, only to realize it had been repositioned over the holiday break, now wedged behind several others. The opening was just out of reach. Rather than tipping the mat over, a noisy act that might have drawn unwanted attention, he did what he had likely done before. He climbed in, gripping the side of the mat with his right hand. He lowered himself in head first, stretching out his left hand to grab the shoe inside, but as he descended deeper, the confined space left him with no room to bend his elbow and pull himself back up. His muscles strained. Panic set in. At some point he lost his grip on the mat's edge and slid further down, his body now fully inverted, his shoulders wedged against the walls of the mat, trapping him. The more he struggled, the more gravity worked against him, constricting his movements. He tried to shift his weight, maybe even attempted to kick himself free. In doing so, he dislodged the shoes he had been wearing, sending them tumbling down near his feet. Blood rushed to his head. The world around him grew darker. Oxygen levels plummeted as his lungs compressed under his own weight. Trapped and helpless, he suffocated in silence, alone in a gym full of students, just beyond the reach of rescue, for nearly 21 hours. Kendrick remained inside the mat unnoticed. Kendrick's absence went unquestioned until his mother reported him missing, but by then it was too late. When his body was finally discovered the next morning, rigor mortis had already set in. The official ruling: accidental positional asphyxia, a misjudged decision that turned deadly in the blink of an eye. Positional asphyxia is a silent, insidious killer. It occurs when a person's body becomes trapped in a position that restricts their breathing, cutting off the oxygen supply until they suffocate. Unlike the dramatic struggle often associated with suffocation, positional asphyxia is a slow, agonizing death, one where the victim may not even realize they are in danger until it's too late. This condition typically happens when someone is unable to free themselves from a confined space, like being wedged between furniture, trapped in a car, or, as in Kendrick Johnson's case, found upside down inside a rolled-up gym mat, when the body is contorted in a way that compresses the chest or prevents the lungs from fully expanding. Every breath becomes shallower, the oxygen levels drop, and eventually unconsciousness sets in if help doesn't arrive in time. Death is inevitable. Medical findings from other positional asphyxia cases reveal strikingly similar patterns. Victims are often discovered in unnatural positions with signs of suffocation, such as blood oozing from the mouth and nose, darkened or discolored skin, and fluid accumulation in the lungs. But what makes these deaths so haunting is how easily they can be mistaken for something else. But the coin had another side. Kendrick Johnson was found dead upside down in a rolled-up gym mat. That much is fact, but to his family nothing else about the official story makes sense. From the moment his body was discovered, the Johnsons have insisted that Kendrick didn't climb into the mat on his own, he didn't fall, he didn't suffocate by accident, he was killed. And what followed was a cover-up so deliberate, so intricate, that even years later the truth remains buried. From the very start things didn't add up. The most glaring red flag was the way the case was handled. The coroner, whose job it was to oversee the body and crime scene, was not called for nearly 6 hours, which is an outright violation of Georgia law. By the time he arrived, the gym was no longer secured, and whatever evidence had been there was already compromised. When Lown County authorities ruled Kendrick's death an accident, they did so with astonishing speed. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's medical examiner signed off on positional asphyxia as the cause of death, dismissing any possibility of foul play. The case was closed, but the Johnsons weren't convinced, because something happened inside that gym, something far darker than an accident. The position of Kendrick's body also raised questions. His arms were in unnatural positions, one stretched above his head, the other bent at his side. If he had been reaching for his shoes, both arms should have been extended downward. The gym mats were stacked in a way that made it nearly impossible for him to have fallen in accidentally, and if he had managed to climb inside, how did his shoes end up neatly placed on top of his legs rather than beneath him? There was also blood enough to cause alarm. A streak of blood was found on a nearby wall, and a pool of blood was seen under his head, yet authorities never tested it, dismissing it as old and unrelated to the case. And of course, as we already know, there were his organs. Months later, Kendrick's parents made the painful decision to exhume his body for an independent autopsy, desperate for answers they felt had been withheld when the body was examined. What they found was horrifying. His internal organs were missing, replaced with newspaper, while officials later claimed this was standard procedure due to decomposition. It only added to the family's growing suspicions. The independent autopsy brought even more troubling findings. While the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had ruled Kendrick's death an accident due to positional asphyxiation, this new autopsy pointed to a much more violent end. It revealed clear signs of blunt force trauma to the neck, evidence that Kendrick had not suffocated but had been struck with enough force to kill him. 2 separate autopsies, 2 completely different conclusions. Which one was telling the truth? The funeral home insisted they received his body that way. The coroner's office denied any involvement. No one could explain it, or no one would. Perhaps most chilling was how long it took for authorities to notify the Johnsons about their son's death. Kendrick's body was discovered in the morning, but his family was not informed until much later. As they pleaded for answers, law enforcement remained indifferent, offering only vague explanations. Kendrick's parents believed they knew who was responsible. The Johnsons did not believe their sons Death was an accident. They were convinced he had been murdered and they believed they knew who was responsible. Their lawsuit pointed to two brothers, Brian and Brandon Bell, who also attended Lown High School. They alleged that one of the brothers had lured Kendrick to the gym where he was brutally attacked under the orders of their father, an FBI agent. The motive, according to the lawsuit, stemmed from an altercation over a girl. The Bell family, however, denied any involvement. School records showed that one of the brothers was out of town on the day Kendrick was last seen alive, while the other was reportedly in another part of the school. Authorities used this as proof that the brothers had airtight alibis, but the Johnsons remained unconvinced, arguing that the evidence had been manipulated to protect the family, and the accusations didn't stop. The answers might have been there. They might have been captured by the silent, unblinking eyes of the surveillance cameras stationed inside Lowndes High School's old gym, the very place where Kendra Johnson was found dead. But those answers, they are missing when forensic video analyst Grant Fredericks examined the school's surveillance footage. He found something deeply unsettling. It wasn't just a question of what the cameras had captured, it was a question of what they hadn't. An entire hour and 5 minutes were missing from two cameras inside the gym, time that included Kendrick's final moments. Two other cameras had lost even more, a staggering 2 hours and 10 minutes of footage. Then at precisely 10:09 p.m. the video resumes just in time to show Kendrick entering the gym. But what happened before that? Who was already inside? We don't know, because that footage, the most critical piece of evidence in the entire case, is simply gone. Even more suspicious was the discovery that the timestamps on the cameras didn't match the cameras inside the gym. Appeared to be running 10 minutes ahead of the ones outside, creating a fractured timeline, one that could easily be manipulated. A camera outside the gym did capture something important in the missing hour of footage. Numerous students walked into the gym. Did they see anything? Were they questioned, or were they part of something that had to be hidden? The deeper Fredericks dug into the video files, the more alarming his findings became. Some of the recordings were corrupted, rendering them unplayable. Others had been processed incorrectly, leading to significant image loss. I can't say why they were done that way, he admitted, but they were not done correctly, and they were not done thoroughly. What should have been a clear, indisputable account of Kendrick's final moments was instead a digital void, empty spaces where the truth should have been. What made it worse was the chain of custody, or rather the complete failure of it. Law enforcement had not immediately taken control of the video system themselves. Instead, they had left it up to the school's IT department to decide what footage to turn over. Fredericks warned that you don't want somebody who might be party to the responsibility to make the decision as to what they provide the police, and yet that's exactly what happened. A school employee, not an investigator, had extracted the footage. It was then handed over to police 5 days after Kendrick's body was found. By then anything could have been altered, deleted, or replaced. Fredericks' conclusion was chilling. Until I have the digital video system in my hand and I can say everything is intact and this is what was recorded, I would still be highly suspicious of this. Somewhere in those missing minutes, in those corrupted files, in those altered timestamps, somewhere in the digital abyss lies the truth about what happened to Kendrick Johnson. But if the truth was captured on cameras, someone made sure we'd never see it. Why were so many leads left unexplored? Why were the Bells seemingly above scrutiny? The Johnsons believed it was because of their father's powerful connections. As the Johnsons pushed for answers, law enforcement remained firm in their stance. Kendrick's death was an accident. When the family accused the sheriff's office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation of mishandling the case, officials dismissed the allegations as baseless. Despite this, disturbing details continued to surface. A chorus report described the handling of the case as very poor and noted that the body had been moved before officials arrived. A sealed body bag had been tampered with. Authorities refused to fully cooperate, determined to uncover the truth. In 2015, the Johnsons filed a lawsuit naming not just the Bell brothers but over 30 defendants, including law enforcement officers, school officials, and medical examiners. They accused the Lown County Sheriff's Office of staging the scene, placing Kendrick's body inside the mat to make it look like an accident. But their case fell apart. No eyewitnesses, no hard evidence, no confession, and yet questions lingered. Investigators, however, stood firm. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation dismissed claims of homicide, citing a regional crime lab report that found no significant injuries on Kendrick's body, but then came the independent autopsy. Dr. William Anderson, a forensic pathologist hired by the Johnsons, concluded Kendrick had died from blunt force trauma to the neck, not suffocation. He ruled it a homicide. Two autopsies, two conflicting causes of death. Which one was the truth? The Johnsons have spent over a decade fighting for answers. They filed lawsuits, staged protests, called out the corruption they believe runs deep in Valdosta, Georgia. We live here, we know how this town is, we know how they will lie, we know how they will cover up for one another. Kendrick's father, Kenneth Johnson, has said they exhumed Kendrick's body twice, desperate for new evidence. The parents have spent thousands of dollars trying to expose the truth, but every time they get close, the case slips further into darkness. The Justice Department launched a federal investigation but never revealed its findings. The courts dismissed key lawsuits, ruling there was not enough evidence. The media moved on, the town moved on, but Kendrick's parents never will, because they believe they know that their son was murdered and that someone somewhere is hiding the truth. The truth remains buried, but the fight for justice is far from over. So what was it, a tragic accident or a carefully concealed murder? To this day there are no definitive answers, not for those who have followed this case, and certainly not for Kendrick Johnson's family. Years have passed, but the truth remains just out of reach, lost in missing footage, conflicting reports, and whispers of a cover-up. Justice remains elusive, and the silence surrounding Kendrick's death is louder than ever. Story 4. They were human beings in that they were all totally different. There you in September 2014, Little was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison. It's late at night while most people go to sleep after a tiring day. Others begin their work as the moon indicates the arrival of darkness over the sky. A transgender black woman is relishing in the bar in Miami, Florida. She smiles at a young black man with curly hair and a thick mustache. The man approaches her and the two hit it off right away. Little does this woman know that this interaction marks the end of her days in this world. What happens next with the woman is truly gut-wrenching. On their second meet-up, the man drives the woman to a secluded place, grabs her neck in an attempt to smother her to death, and then leaves her in the middle of nowhere for the body to decompose. Pick the ones that you think you're going to kill. No, it depends on how her neck looks. I've got a smooth neck, and as a child I got attracted to the neck part. So you pick them out by the way that their neck looks, because if the neck looks good, then they might be somebody that you want to have sex with, or somebody that you might want to kill. What's the top? Both. Okay. The most heinous serial killer, Samuel McDowell, also known as Samuel Little, showed no remorse as he proudly described how he murdered his first victim in 1971, and then there was no stopping him from hunting down helpless women who fall under the category of the less dead people. From 1971 to 2005, this man would pursue, kill vulnerable women from one state to another, and get away with at least a haunting number of 93 murders over a period of several decades. I met her in a nightclub in New Orleans, so I took off the exit and went, and that showed her off. It was a road leading into the woods, and we went in, and I grabbed her by the legs and pulled her to the water. That's the only one that I ever killed by chance. A pure evil who does not show a hint of remorse through his expressions. Samuel Little was rather proud of his murder confessions. On June 7, 1940, a prostitute gave birth to a child who would ruthlessly kill women from her profession. The most prolific murderer in the history of the USA was born in the small town of Reynolds, Georgia. This town had a population of about 1,000. Most of the town residents lived below the poverty line. Samuel was an unwanted child since the day he arrived in this world. At one point his mother abandoned him on the side of the road so she could get away with the expenses of raising a child. He saw his mother selling herself at night and called her the Lady of the Night in one of his confessions. Since his early childhood days, Samuel saw how the poorest of people worked to earn money. He had quite a distant relationship with his mother, who would think of him as an additional expense and not a son. But Samuel was not completely abandoned by his family. His grandmother decided to take responsibility for his expenditures and gave him a place in her house in Lorain, Ohio. Samuel attended Hawthorne Junior High School but quickly dropped out due to poor grades and even poorer behavior. He was however good at art and boxing, which came in handy later in life when he viciously took the lives of innocent women. After dropping out of school, he would choose a path that would drive him to commit crimes. Samuel would get addicted to breaking the law, which would land him in prison over 100 times. In 1956, at the young age of 16, Samuel was convicted of breaking and entering. He was sent to a juvenile detention center and released shortly. About 5 years later, he was once again caught breaking and entering a Lorain furniture store. This time he was sent to an adult prison for some time. Samuel's list of crimes increased as he got older. He was arrested about 26 times in 11 different states. By the time he reached 35 years of age, this man had quite a clear vision of what he wanted in life, and it clearly did not involve abiding by the law. Samuel had a long list of crimes that did not involve murder, yet assault, theft, DUIs, fraud, solicitation, armed robbery, breaking and entering, aggravated assault on a police officer, shoplifting, and many more crimes that Samuel would commit throughout his life before finally getting sentenced to life in prison. While he is getting caught, convicted, and released, nobody in law enforcement has realized that this man is killing women from one U.S. state to another. By 1975, he had been across 11 states for almost every crime that you have heard of, and even attacking government officials, and yet he always managed to walk free. Then came 1982. Little was arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi for the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose LaPri, who had gone missing that September. It seemed like the law had finally caught up with him, but no, a grand jury refused to indict him, and just like that, he was off the hook before investigators could do anything else. Little was shipped off to Florida, where he was tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia and Mount. Witnesses said they had seen him with Mount the night before she disappeared, but the jury didn't trust their testimonies. Once again, he walked free in January 1984. After that, Little moved to California and wasted no time finding new victims. In October 1984, he kidnapped, beat, and strangled 22-year-old Lori Barrows in San Diego. She survived. A month later, police found him in the back seat of his car with another woman, beaten unconscious and barely alive. She had been left in the same area where he had attacked Barrows. This time he was sentenced to just 2.5 years in prison, and the moment he got out in February 1987, he went straight to Los Angeles and murdered at least 10 more women. For years, Little moved from place to place, leaving behind a trail of victims while staying just out of reach of the law. All that changed on September 5, 2012. Police found him at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky, and arrested him on a narcotics charge. It seemed like a small offense, but little did they know a DNA test will change everything. Moving forward, the results linked him to 3 cold cases from the 1980s: Linda Alfred, killed in July 1987, Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, killed in September of the same year, and Audrey Nelson Everett, killed in August 2 years later. All 3 had been strangled and dumped on the streets of Los Angeles. That arrest opened the floodgates, and the water came drowning the law enforcement authorities. Investigators soon tied him to more than 30 other murders from the same time period. The case of Melinda Lry in Mississippi was reopened, and the deeper police dug, the worse it got. Eventually, Little admitted to killing 93 women across multiple states, making him the deadliest serial killer in U.S. history. For years he had gone unnoticed, preying on women society had overlooked, but in the end his past caught up with him, and this time there was no escaping justice. By September 2014, nearly 2 years later, after he was caught on a narcotics charge, Samuel Little was finally on trial for the murders of Linda Alfred, Audrey Nelson Everett, and Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca. The prosecution had rock-solid DNA evidence, plus testimony from survivors who had barely escaped his attacks over the years. On September 25, 2014, the verdict came down. Samuel Little was found guilty. Little was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole, but even then, he refused to admit what he had done, insisting he was innocent. He was locked up at California State Prison in Los Angeles County, but that was far from the end of his story. For decades law enforcement suspected that Little had killed far more people than they could prove. Then in November of 2018 everything changed out of nowhere. He confessed to strangling Melissa Thomas in 1996. A few days later he admitted to killing Denise Christie brothers in 1994. That confession led to another trial in Texas where he pleaded guilty and picked up another life sentence, but he wasn't done talking. Over the next few weeks, Little started spilling details about dozens of other murders. Investigators were stunned as he confessed to more than 90 killings across 14 states spanning from 1970 to 2005. He looked in the eyes of the officers as he admitted to these crimes, making fun of the authorities who failed to catch him as he put the vulnerable through extreme suffering before finally taking their lives. His memory was terrifyingly sharp. He could describe victims in detail, recall where he had picked them up, and even explain how he had disposed of their bodies. He admitted to killing of Brenda Alexander in Alabama, Fredonia Smith in Georgia, Dorothy Richards and Daisy McClure in Louisiana, Julia Critchfield in Mississippi. He had claimed to dump her body off a cliff. Nancy Carol Stevens in Mississippi, Evelyn Weston in South Carolina, Rosie Hill in Florida, and those were just the ones confirmed. In November of 2018 Little wasn't just talking, he was drawing from his prison cell. He sketched portraits of his victims, capturing their faces with haunting accuracy. The FBI released these drawings hoping to match them to real missing persons and unsolved cases, and it worked. At least one of his sketches helped solve a cold case in Ohio. The confessions kept coming and they would not stop until the death of this monster in December 2018. He was indicted for the 1981 murder of Linda Sue Boards in Kentucky. That same month, a Tennessee victim from 1975 was finally identified as Martha Cunningham. Then in 2019 he was linked to even more killings in Ohio, including Mary Jo Payton and Rose Evans in Cleveland, a woman found in near I-271 in Ohio. He couldn't remember her name. A victim in Akron. 2 women in Cincinnati. One was Anna Stewart, last seen visiting her sister in the hospital in 1981. A woman he met in Columbus and dumped in Kentucky. By June 2019 he had been officially indicted for multiple Ohio murders. Little's confessions didn't just close cold cases, they also freed innocent people. In November 2020 he admitted to 2 Florida murders, including one where someone else had been wrongfully convicted. Even after his death in December 2020 his crimes were still being uncovered. In 2022 authorities identified Zena Marie Jones, one of his Memphis victims, from the 9s. In the end, Samuel Little confessed to so many murders that were more than any other known serial killer in American history. Many of his victims were women. Society had ignored sex workers, runaways, women struggling with addiction. They had been forgotten, their cases left unsolved for decades. But in his final years, Little gave them back their names. He told their stories, and though justice came far too late for most of them, their families finally got the answers they had been waiting for. Here are some of the stories in his own filthy words that Little told about the victims he claimed were less dead. Location: 1 Miami, Florida. Victim 1 Marianne Moran was a young and attractive teenage transgender black woman. According to Samuel Little, she was around 140 pounds and between 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 7 inches in tall. In 1971, the two met at a bar called Pool Palace in Miami, Florida. They talked for a while and hit it off immediately. A few days later they crossed paths again at another bar in Overtown. This time Little offered Marianne a ride home and she accepted without hesitation. Upon arriving at her residence, one of Marianne's roommates asked Little to buy shaving cream. Taking advantage of the moment, he lured Marianne back into his car under the pretense of running the errand. Once on Highway 27 he reached over and wrapped his hands around her throat, tightening his grip until she was lifeless. "It's like Everglades like that. And we ran into some water running, but before we got to the water the earth was mushy. I told her I'm loose. And she fell into her face down." "And how far outside of Miami do you think you were?" "About a mile, 2 miles. What year did Marianne occur?" 72. "Okay, 1972. She was Without remorse he drove to a remote dirt road leading to a river where he discarded her body into the thick muddy waters. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his life unbothered and unnoticed. Victim 2, unknown woman. Little's second victim in Florida, murdered in 71 or 72, was another black woman. He described her with brutal disdain, calling her ugly, dark-skinned, short and stiff. He believed she worked as a prostitute. After picking her up, he drove to the woods near military property where he smothered her to death before abandoning her body among the trees, assuming someone would eventually discover it. Victim 3, Emily. In the mid-70s, Little took the life of a young black prostitute whom he recalls as Emily. He remembered her as having big legs and a pretty face. She carried a University of Miami student ID, reinforcing his belief that she worked as a prostitute. After luring Emily into his car, he drove down a highway toward a secluded dirt road. A fight broke out between them and Emily fought back, throwing punches at him. Enraged, Little overpowered her, beating her to death before dragging her lifeless body to a garbage pile and concealing it beneath a mattress. He even recalled seeing a man watching from a distance, but as always he walked away without consequence. Victim 4, unknown woman. A 28-year-old black woman, dark-skinned and well-built, crossed paths with Little 2 years after he had known her family. He and his girlfriend Jean had sold clothes to them on Nelson Street when he ran into her at a liquor store. She was complaining about her husband's mistreatment. Seizing the opportunity, Little offered her comfort and a ride, and then he strangled her and abandoned her body in the thick grass, leaving her to be swallowed by the elements. Victim 5, unknown woman. In 1977 or 1978, Little met a chubby black woman dancing at a bar. She was wearing shorts that night, but later changed into a skirt at her house before they left together. Her siblings, familiar with Little, called him Sam. After she rejoined him outside, he told her they were going to Lakeland. Instead, he drove toward the dark woods near the railroad tracks where he strangled her to death. He kept her underwear as a twisted trophy before discarding her body in the open wilderness. Location 2, North Little Rock, Arkansas. Victim 1, Ruth. On a frigid, snowy day in North Little Rock, Arkansas, Little encountered another black woman approximately 5 feet 7 inches in tall, whom he believes was named Ruth. They spent 3 days together before he was arrested for shoplifting. Upon his release 3 hours later, he returned to his car where Ruth was asleep in the passenger seat. They drove around meeting her ex-boyfriend before eventually heading back to her place the following day. Little drove Ruth down a dirt road. Determined to make her his next victim, he strangled her manually, then abandoned her lifeless body near a cornfield. Location 3, California. Victim 1, unknown woman. In 1987 in Los Angeles, Little entered a drug dealer's house and spotted a black woman wearing shorts. The dealer, also her pimp, ordered her to leave with Little. After purchasing drugs, they entered an abandoned house with a garage cluttered with wood planks, paint cans and sawhorses. They climbed onto a ledge inside the garage, but as Little's sick urges consumed him, he wrapped his hands around her throat. The young woman fought desperately, and in their struggle, they fell off the ledge, but Little's grip remained firm. He choked her to death. Weeks later, when he drove by the crime scene, was taped off, and soon after the entire structure was demolished. Location 2, unknown woman. Later, still in California, Little met another black woman wearing a mini dress at a motel near Tam's Burgers in Los Angeles. He contemptuously called her a crackhead, exploiting her drug addiction. He lured her into his car he parked near thick vegetation by a laundromat, where she climbed into the back seat. He followed, wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed until she stopped breathing. He later disposed of her body near an iron pipe railing, hanging her lifeless corpse among the thick trees and underbrush, confident that no one would find her. Victim 3, unknown teenage girl. A teenage girl about 19 years old became another victim of his monstrosity. She was petite, weighing only 120 pounds, and had a distinctive red bandana around her forehead with tattoos adorning her body. Little met her in Compton, California, and promised her drugs. She trusted him and got into his car. He drove her to the secluded Hollywood Hills, where he suddenly turned violent. The young girl fought for her life with every ounce of her strength, but it was no match for Little's trained fists. When he finally crushed the life out of her, he pulled over by a fence and threw her body down the steep hillside. Listening with Satisfaction as it tumbled into the darkness. Victim 4 unknown woman. Another victim met her tragic fate at Little's hands in 1992. She was a black woman wearing a religious turban, light-skinned and weighed about 200 pounds. Little lured her into his car and drove to his residence before heading to Compton. It was raining when he parked behind a store during a riot. The chaos outside masked her final struggle. She honked desperately, trying to summon help. A Hispanic man noticed but did nothing, overpowering her. Little smothered her to death. He placed her lifeless body in the passenger seat to make it look as though she were merely sleeping. Then he drove to a nearby bank branch and pulled her body onto the manicured lawn, leaving her to the mercy of the storm. But despite his staggering body count, he was only officially convicted for 8 murders, cases where DNA and witness testimonies made his guilt undeniable. These victims were just the beginning of Little retelling the tales of his monstrosity. Some names he remembered, while some he had long forgotten. However, he still recalled the eerie details of his victims' weight and height. Even remembering their facial features, the list would go on to complete the horrific number of 93. While he admitted to the murders, Samuel Little also began to share the details of his personal life during the years he killed innocent women left and right. Little had a longtime girlfriend, Aurelia Dorsey, who stuck by his side, even helping him evade conviction in a 1972 robbery case. Their relationship wasn't built on love in any conventional sense. It thrived in the shadows of crime, a partnership rooted in deception and survival. But Dorsey, like so many in Little's circle, didn't get a happy ending. She died of a brain hemorrhage in 1988, leaving him to continue his dark work alone. Even in death, Little remained an enigma. On December 30, 2020, he passed away in a Los Angeles County hospital. Officially, there was no cause of death listed, but given his failing health, diabetes, heart problems, and a body worn down by time, his end was inevitable. Unlike his victims, who were discarded like afterthoughts, he slipped away peacefully, a privilege he never granted them. But death didn't grant him an escape from being the infamous monster that he was. His crimes and confessions became the subject of books, interviews, and documentaries. Author Gillian Lawrence sat across from him for more than 40 hours, listening as he relived his horrors, sketching the faces of women whose names had long been forgotten. She had started with the intention of writing a crime novel, but her path took a sharp turn when she learned about him from LAPD Detective Mitzi Roberts. What began as fiction turned into a brutal, undeniable reality. Lauren's work led to the haunting stars Dacus confronting a serial killer, and her book Behold the Monster, both peeling back the layers of Little's twisted existence. Through her efforts, the world saw not just the killer but the failures of a system that let him keep killing for over 40 years. His victims weren't just statistics, they were people ignored because of their race, lifestyle, or circumstances. Society had forgotten them, but Little hadn't. He remembered every detail. In the end, Samuel Little died as he lived in his own world, his own twisted mind painting the faces of the women he murdered. He never showed remorse, never feared justice. He saw himself as untouchable, a predator who played by his own rules. But history will remember him differently, not as a mastermind or a legend, but as a killer with no remorse who thrived on society's indifference. And while his body rests in a grave somewhere, his victims still speak through their families, through investigators, and through the stories now told to ensure that monsters like him don't go unnoticed. Again, Story 5. Killing a whole family is already evil enough, but to torture, molest, and trap a child in a barrel for 2 whole days before eventually killing her is a whole new different kind of evil. This wasn't just a murder, it was a nightmare that crawled into reality. And out of all the cases we've uncovered, this one stands out as one of the most disturbing, so brutal, so twisted that even hardened police officers couldn't erase it from their minds. Because for Felicia Elliott and the entire Elliott family, this wasn't just a crime story, it was their living, breathing hell back in the late 1990s, and it would take years before justice finally broke through the shadows. And what happened on that night, it will enrage you, haunt you, and make you wish you could reach through time just to land a punch on the monsters behind it. But before we dive into the terrifying details, let's take a moment to know who the Elliott family really was. For starters, not much is known about the early years of the Elliott family, but What we do know paints a picture of an ordinary family living a simple yet fulfilling life. Carl Elliott married Lisa Elliott several years before the events that would tragically change their lives forever. Their love story was followed by the birth of their first child, a daughter named Felicia, and then just a year later their son Gregory came into the world. Carl worked tirelessly, holding down two jobs as both a mechanic and a carpenter, doing everything he could to provide for his growing family. The Elliots lived in a cozy house situated on a decent-sized property in the small rural town of Dalton, Arkansas. Now Dalton was a tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a slower, more peaceful pace. Behind their house, the Elliots had a mobile home set up for Lisa's elderly parents who were facing serious health issues. Her father and stepmother both struggled with mental health problems, possibly dementia, and were slowly losing their hearing, so it was important for Lisa to have them nearby. They were family after all, and Carl and Lisa wanted to care for them in their later years. The town itself was quiet, almost forgotten by time, but it wasn't without its darker sides. While it may have seemed like a safe haven, the lack of law enforcement presence made Dalton a prime location for the drug trade, but for the Elliots, life remained untouched by such troubles until the night of July 30, 1998. That night a fierce storm swept across the town, the rain falling in torrents, pounding the earth and turning the streets into rivers. Around 1:15 in the morning, Deputy Randy Barber, who was on patrol that night, received a call about a domestic disturbance at the Elliott home on Township Road. When he arrived at the property, he could hear shouting from inside, but by the time he got to the door, everything was strangely quiet. The rain still pounded relentlessly, but there were no lights on. No signs of trouble. With no immediate reason for concern, the deputy decided not to perform a welfare check and left, thinking everything was fine. What he didn't know, though, was that the nightmare had already begun as morning arrived and the storm slowly passed. Lisa's stepmother, Mrs. Boyce, woke up and went to open her front door. To her surprise, the door wouldn't budge. Something heavy was blocking it. She tried pushing against it, but it didn't move. Frustrated, she gave up and went around to the other side of the house, but when she reached the porch, what she found there would forever change her life. Lying in front of the door was the lifeless body of her 27-year-old stepdaughter, Lisa Elliott. Panicked Mrs. Dubbs rushed back inside to alert her husband, Kenny. Sheriff Rob Salmon soon arrived at the scene. When he knocked on the front door, he found it slightly ajar. Calling out to see if anyone was home, he was met with silence, only the faint hum of a television playing in the distance. The stillness was unsettling, and a sinking feeling began to set in. What had happened inside that home was far worse than anyone could have imagined, and what followed would leave the entire town of Dalton in shock for years to come. The moment the officer stepped into the house, the horror was immediate. Lying lifeless on the living room floor was young Gregory Elliott, just 6 years old. His small frame, still in pajamas, painted a heartbreaking picture of innocence lost far too soon. Sheriff Rob Salmons, shaken but determined, swept through the rest of the house in search of survivors, but what he found instead were haunting traces of a struggle. Blood smeared across the kitchen, splattered in the dining area, and even staining a child's toy telephone left behind on a desk. It was clear someone had fought with everything they had outside. Lisa Elliott, just 27, was still in the same spot where her stepmother had discovered her hours earlier, collapsed on the front porch. Investigators noticed a bloody handprint smeared on her father's door, suggesting she had tried to escape, maybe even call for help, but there was no time, and something was still terribly wrong. Two family members were missing: 30-year-old Carl Elliott and his daughter Felicia. Only 7. In cases like this, the spouse is naturally the first suspect, especially since he was missing alongside his daughter but just 48 hours later. That theory was shattered. Carl's lifeless body was pulled from the nearby 11-Point River. He had been executed, shot twice in the back of the head with a .22 caliber weapon, and shallow knife wounds were visible across his throat. He had been silenced. The autopsies that followed were gruesome and deeply unsettling. Lisa had endured 27 blows to the head, each strike believed to come from a tire iron found at the crime scene, but what ended her life was even more vicious. The killer took the iron and drove it deep into her throat, cutting through a carotid artery and severing her windpipe. Gregory, her little boy, had suffered just as much. The same weapon had been used to stab into his throat repeatedly. His skull had been fractured by a blow. His jaw was broken, and knife wounds covered his tiny body. After Carl Elliott's body was discovered, one terrifying question remained: where was little Felicia? The thought of a 7-year-old girl out there lost, taken, or worse haunted not only the families, loved ones, but the entire community. Investigators searched for answers for 2 long years. Every lead ended in frustration. Every hope slowly faded, and with each passing day the possibility of finding Felicia alive grew dimmer. Then, on a quiet afternoon, September 7, 2000, everything changed. A hunter was out near Warm Springs, deep in the woods, just doing what he normally did, but what he stumbled upon that day was no ordinary discovery. Lying in a dry creek bed were what appeared to be human remains. The area had been untouched for some time, nature slowly reclaiming what was left behind. The hunter quickly contacted the authorities, and when investigators arrived they collected everything they could from the scene. DNA testing later confirmed the heartbreaking truth: the remains belonged to Felicia Elliott. She had been found, but the relief was quickly swallowed by sorrow due to how much time had passed and how far the body had decomposed. The medical examiner could not determine exactly how she died. During the investigation many names came up, but one family in particular kept drawing attention: the Greens. They were no strangers to trouble living in nearby Randolph County. The Green family had a dangerous reputation. Billy Green, the head of the family, was a well-known drug dealer in the area. His oldest son, Chad Green, worked right alongside him, and strangely enough, Chad and Carl Elliott had once been close. They had done a few drug deals together. By all accounts they had a good relationship until suddenly they didn't. Something had happened between them, something that changed everything. Rumors began to circulate. Some said that Carl Elliott had stolen several marijuana plants from the Greens, and that the family was furious. Others whispered that Lisa Elliott, just 2 months before the murders, had reached out to someone desperately asking for a loan of $10,000. She said they owed money to the Greens and that she was terrified of what they might do. The Greens had a long history of violence and criminal behavior, so it was no surprise that the investigators kept their eyes on them. Over the years the police questioned them more than once, but they never had enough solid evidence to make an arrest. It was frustrating, like trying to hold water in your hands. But then, almost 5 years after the Elliott family was brutally torn apart, fate stepped in. On July 29, 2003, a single piece of information came to light, and it changed everything. A confidential informant, later identified as Mary Green, Billy Green's former wife, shocked investigators with a crucial revelation that would begin to unravel the truth. Mary shared exactly what her son Chad Green had told her about the night of the murders. She also revealed things that Billy himself had confessed to her. According to Mary, on the evening of July 29, 1998, Billy received a phone call from Chad and left their home without saying a word. He was gone for hours, and Mary had no idea what was happening until 2 years later, when Billy finally admitted the truth. Billy told her that he had gone to meet Chad to help him clean up after the murders. Billy allegedly told Mary that Chad was responsible for all 4 deaths, the brutal murders of Carl, Lisa Gregory, and Felicia Elliott. But Chad, in a twist, claimed multiple times that it was his father Billy who was the true culprit. This contradiction only deepened the mystery, but it also gave investigators a new lead. The breakthrough came when, just the following day, police arrested 27-year-old Chad Green and his father, 47-year-old Billy Green, on unrelated charges. While they were in custody, investigators began applying pressure using this new information they'd received from Mary. Billy, calm and collected, refused to be shaken, but Chad wasn't as strong. Eventually Chad cracked under the pressure and started talking. He agreed to testify against his father in exchange for a plea deal. The deal would reduce his charges to a 40-year sentence for his role in the quadruple homicide, and Chad accepted the bargain. Hoping for a lighter sentence, with a heavy heart, Chad began explaining what had happened that fateful night. He confirmed that Carl Elliott had been involved in illegal dealings with Billy and himself, and even admitted that Carl had stolen from Billy, a crime that enraged the elder Green. Billy was furious about the theft and wanted revenge. Together, father and son had come up with a plan. Chad described how on the Night of the murders. The Elliots were getting ready for bed when a knock sounded at their door. It was Chad. Claiming his truck had broken down about a mile from their house and asking Carl for help. Carl, being a friend, agreed. Without hesitation they both got into Carl's car and left the house. According to Chad, when they reached the location of the broken truck, Billy was already there waiting. Without warning, Billy shot Carl twice in the back of the head, killing him instantly, and then pushed his body into the nearby river. Afterward, Billy and Chad took Carl's car and drove back to the Elliott residence. As they returned, Billy made it clear that they had to clean up the loose ends. That's when things took a horrifying turn. As they pulled up to the Elliott home, young Gregory Elliott saw his father's car and rushed to the door. Who exactly Gregory encountered remains unclear, but according to Chad, it was Billy who greeted the boy at the door. Chad stayed outside by the car but was soon startled by the sound of shouting and chaos inside. Concerned, he went in to check on his father. That's where he allegedly found Billy violently attacking Lisa Elliott. Billy, seeing Chad, quickly ordered him to go back outside, saying that the situation didn't concern him. As Chad continued his chilling recount, he recalled turning to leave the house only to see young Gregory Elliott lying lifeless on the floor. After Billy finished with Lisa Elliott, the mother, he went on to find the final member of the Elliott family, little Felicia. She had been hiding in her bedroom, terrified. Billy wrapped the small child in blankets and carried her outside. Chad could see that Felicia was still alive, moving slightly, but that wouldn't last for long. Billy, without any hesitation, placed the girl into the trunk of the car, taping her hands and mouth shut to ensure she couldn't escape or cry out. As they were about to drive away from the Elliott home, something caught Billy's eye. He looked out the window and saw movement across the yard. It was Lisa Elliott, still alive, crawling across the lawn. Billy didn't think twice. He got out of the car and without mercy ended her life. Once Lisa was no longer a threat, Billy returned to the car and the two men left the property, seemingly unfazed by the carnage they had left behind. However, the horror didn't end there. Chad later claimed that Felicia Elliott was kept alive for 2 more days. 2 agonizing days. She was locked in a trash can inside the garage where the temperature soared well above 100 degrees. The poor little girl endured unspeakable horrors during those days, and Chad claimed that at one point Billy uttered a chilling phrase, "All good things must come to an end." It was then that Felicia's life would be tragically snuffed out. Billy, with no hint of remorse, drove her to a creek about half a mile from their home. There he forced her head underwater, holding her down until she could no longer fight for her life. To finish the horrific act, he slashed her throat, ending her life on the night of August 1, 1998. The investigation and legal proceedings would drag on for years, but justice seemed to finally be within reach. In the year 2004, both Billy and Chad Green were convicted of the murders. Billy was sentenced to the death penalty for his role in the brutal killings, while Chad, who had cooperated with authorities and provided critical information about the murders, received a plea deal and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. However, just when it seemed like the case had been resolved, an unexpected turn of events occurred. In the year 2006, the Arkansas Supreme Court made a shocking decision to overturn Billy's conviction. The reason: a significant legal error. A key witness for the prosecution had testified that she believed Billy was responsible for the death of her nephew, and claimed she was terrified of him, but her testimony was based on an unrelated event entirely, and the court ruled that this should not have been allowed. This was seen as a serious breach of legal protocol, and as a result Billy's conviction was thrown out. A new trial was ordered, throwing the case back into the public eye. In the second trial, which took place in May of 2012, Chad refused to testify against his father. This refusal to cooperate effectively voided his original plea deal, and he would need to be resentenced. One of the most pivotal moments came from a witness who had once been Billy's cellmate in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. This inmate, who was housed with Billy at the Federal Correctional Institute in Fort Worth in 2008, would provide crucial testimony that would ultimately shed more light on the chilling events leading up to the murders. On May 3, the inmate testified about what Billy had confided in him while they were in prison together. According to the inmate, Billy revealed that his son Chad had hurt Felicia on multiple occasions prior to the murders. The young girl, too afraid to stay silent had allegedly told her father Carl Elliott about the abuse. Billy's response was chilling. He claimed that Felicia's father had been planning to take the information to the sheriff. Billy said this is why Chad had gone to the Elliott home in the first place, to stop Carl from going to the authorities. Billy explained that in a fit of rage and desperation Chad decided to lure Carl to the 11-Point River where he shot him, but the violence didn't stop there. Billy said that once Chad returned to the house he killed the remaining members of the Elliott family, sparing no one. The inmate testified that Chad stabbed Lisa Elliott with a knife before taking Felicia. Billy also claimed that Felicia's final words were a heartbreaking plea, quote, "Please don't hurt me." But the revelations didn't stop with the inmate's testimony. As the retrial unfolded, Billy Green, in a stunning twist, turned the tables and testified against his own son Chad. During the trial, Billy recounted a conversation he had with Chad days after the slayings. The two were driving back to their home in Warm Springs from a convenience store when Billy asked Chad if he had killed the Elliott family. Chad, with tears streaming down his face, admitted to the murders. He explained that on the night of the killings he had driven to the 11-Point River, but his truck broke down after walking to Carl's house to ask for help. The situation quickly escalated. According to Billy's testimony, Chad said that an argument had broken out between him and Carl, and during the struggle Chad had shoved a gun in Carl's face. The gun went off and Carl was killed instantly afterward. Chad rolled Carl's body into the river and returned to the Elliott house to finish what he had started. He murdered Lisa and Gregory Elliott before taking Felicia, wrapping her in a rug and placing her in the trunk of the car. But the horror didn't end there. Billy claimed that after they had driven away, Chad carried the little girl through a wooded area and into a creek that had flooded during a storm. In the darkness he murdered Felicia as well. Billy explained that he hadn't originally disclosed his son's confession in 1998 because he feared Chad would be convicted and sentenced to death, but as the investigation unfolded it became clear that there was no concrete evidence to pin the murders solely on one person. Investigators had no reliable witnesses and the DNA evidence was inconclusive, making it impossible to charge just one of the Greens. In the end, Chad Green was sentenced to 4 life sentences in prison for the murders of Carl, Lisa, Gregory and Felicia Elliott. On top of that, he received an additional 40 years for kidnapping Felicia. In an unrelated case, Chad was also convicted of assaulting 2 young girls and received another 56 years for those crimes. As it turned out, Chad Green had a deeply disturbing reputation within his community. He was known to have a history of being a pedo, making the theory that he had sexually assaulted Felicia prior to the murders all the more chilling. The possibility that Felicia had confided in her father Carl about the abuse and that Carl had been planning to go to the sheriff painted a dark and twisted picture of the motivations behind the murders. This explains why Chad decided to eliminate everyone. Billy Green too could not escape the consequences of his involvement in these horrific acts. He was sentenced to 4 life sentences for the murders of Carl, Lisa, Gregory and Felicia Elliott. On top of that, he received an additional 40 years for his role in the kidnapping of Felicia. However, due to the circumstantial nature of the case with no solid physical evidence directly linking him to the killings, the death penalty was taken off the table. The lack of irrefutable evidence meant that Billy would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but the justice system could not offer the finality that many hoped for. Today, both Billy and Chad Green are serving their life sentences at the Arkansas Department of Corrections, where they will remain for the rest of their lives. The tragic Elliott family was laid to rest together at the Gravesville Cemetery in Dalton, Arkansas, their lives forever cut short by the brutal actions of 2 men. As much as this case was full of confusion, twists and finger-pointing, one thing is clear: both Billy and Chad played significant roles in the horrifying deaths of the Elliott family. While the true extent of each person's responsibility may never be fully understood, the judge and jury made a decisive move by handing down identical sentences for both father and son, ensuring that justice was served in the only way it could be. Story 6: She should never ever be allowed on the streets ever again. In life we are clearly broken without him. Here he was, a piece of the puzzle that kept our family together. They say a child should always protect their mother. but in this case that bond turned into the weapon that shattered everything. It's a heartbreaking reality, which is why Shamaz Brown, the woman you see in that interview, was so determined to bring justice to their family, because sometimes the warning signs are already there, we just don't know when they'll explode. And unlike the crimes we've shared before, this one cuts deeper. The daughter didn't just kill her own mother, she went as far as to cover her in bleach, trying to wash away not just evidence but guilt, history and humanity. And if it weren't for that one phone call, the truth might have stayed buried. But before we get deeper into how this all spiraled out of control, let's go back, because understanding the beginning might just explain how it all ended. For starters, Nicole Lowe's story begins in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she was born and raised. Like many kids, her early memories are a mix of both good and bad. One of her fondest memories from childhood was learning how to ride a bike. It was one of those moments that made her feel independent and free, a simple but joyous milestone that many can relate to. First positive memory as a child, riding a bike, learning how to ride a bike. But like many people's lives, Nicole's journey was far from perfect, and she quickly learned that things weren't always as they seemed. A major turning point in her life came when she discovered at the age of 12 that the man she had believed was her father wasn't actually her biological dad, and for Nicole this was a tough realization. Now Nicole wasn't alone in growing up. She had siblings, 3 of them lived in the same house with her. Being the only girl in the family, she had her share of experiences that shaped who she was. She described herself as quiet, well-behaved and a bit naive. Growing up, she wasn't the kind of kid who got into trouble or caused problems. In fact, she was pretty innocent for her age. Nicole said that she was always focused on being a good kid and doing what was expected of her. Life seemed to be going along smoothly, but as with many stories, life had other plans. When she reached middle school, things still seemed to be on track. She didn't face any major issues and she did well enough academically, but it was high school where her life began to take a different turn. At the age of 16, Nicole became pregnant, and this moment changed the course of her education and future. With the weight of pregnancy, she made the decision to drop out of high school. Instead of continuing with her schooling, she decided to focus on raising her child. The challenges of pregnancy and motherhood at such a young age were overwhelming, but Nicole pushed through. She later went back to earn her GED, working hard to regain some sense of normalcy. However, Nicole's life continued to take unexpected and dark turns as she grew into adulthood. Though she initially avoided serious criminal activity, she did have a few run-ins with the law. These were minor offenses, things like receiving stolen property and participating in joy rides. They weren't the kind of crimes that would put her on anyone's radar, but they still marked the beginning of her struggles with the law. And these minor crimes would escalate in 2002 when Nicole became involved in a crime that would leave a man dead and forever alter the course of her life. The victim, Jeffrey Brown, was someone she knew well. They weren't just acquaintances or strangers. Nicole and Jeffrey were close friends. They worked near each other, and from the outside it seemed like they had a regular friendship, but that wasn't the whole story. Behind the scenes there were things going on in Nicole's life that no one could have known, and those secrets would eventually play a significant role in what happened that fateful day. Nicole was married at the time, and she had a husband and a friend who would also play critical roles in the crime. She met her husband on a chat line, something that was fairly common at the time, and the two developed a relationship that would later lead to criminal involvement. The third person involved in the situation was a friend of her husband's, someone she didn't know very well but enough to trust them at that time. These 3 people, Nicole, her husband and his friend, would be the ones involved in the crime that ended in murder. When asked to explain what happened, Nicole spoke openly about her role in the crime. She had been the one to set things up, though she never imagined things would turn out as badly as they did. At the time, she allegedly believed that her co-defendants were simply going to retrieve stolen drugs that had been taken from someone else. She thought the plan was to steal those drugs back, not to kill anyone. She didn't know that things would escalate to the point of a homicide. Nicole explained that she had given her co-defendants the key to Jeffrey's house, thinking they were going to take the drugs and leave without causing harm, but in the end that wasn't how it happened. The robbery turned deadly. Jeffrey Brown was shot and killed. Her actions, whether intentional or not had played a crucial role in the events that unfolded. She had helped her co-defendants covered their tracks and kept quiet about the whole situation afterward. Even though she hadn't pulled the trigger, she had still helped make it happen. Whether she fully understood it or not, she knew that her actions would come with serious consequences, and deep down she realized that she was just as responsible for the outcome after the shooting. Things didn't calm down quickly. The chaotic aftermath left Nicole in a state of shock and fear. She described what happened next in her account. She dropped her co-defendants off and went straight home, but her journey didn't end there. Once she was at home, she was faced with the grim task of cleaning the car. There was blood in the vehicle, a stark reminder of what had just occurred. Nicole had no idea what to do. She wasn't sure if her co-defendants had gotten rid of the evidence like the weapons or the clothes they had worn during the crime, but she knew she had to act quickly. To cover her tracks, in a panic she tried to erase any trace of what had happened, but the reality of the situation set in. She was terrified and she could feel the weight of the crime sinking in now. Justice wasn't immediate. Nicole lived with the weight of what she had done for an entire year before the police finally caught up with her in 2003. Nearly 12 months after the crime, the police tracked her down and arrested her. The year-long gap between the crime and her arrest gave her time to reflect, but it also meant that she lived with constant anxiety and dread. Nicole was convicted for her role in the robbery-turned-murder. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Her co-defendants were also convicted and each received the sentence of 10 years in prison, 2 years longer than Nicole's own sentence. According to Nicole, her mother visited her once a week, helping her stay connected to the outside world and providing her with much needed emotional support. It was these visits that helped her cope with the isolation and loneliness that prison life often brings. During her time behind bars, Nicole kept a job, staying productive and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. Before we continue, I want to hear your thoughts on her sentencing. Given her knowledge of the crime, do you honestly think 8 years was enough? This case is especially chilling because, according to police reports, Nicole had been in an intimate relationship with the victim. She used that trust to her advantage, robbing him in his own apartment, and tragically her co-defendants ended up taking his life. So for her to walk away with only 8 years, that's beyond disturbing. It almost feels like a slap in the face to the victim and his family. What do you think? Was justice truly served? Drop your thoughts below. Fast forward to 2010. Near the end of her 8-year sentence, Nicole wrote a letter to the prison officials expressing her remorse and promising to make amends. In the letter she wrote, "I will find a group so I can give back. I have hurt a lot of people, so I have a lot of making up to do." These words seemed sincere, as though Nicole had finally come to terms with her past and wanted to make things right. It appeared as though she was truly trying to change and make amends for the pain she had caused. She was about to be released from prison, and she hoped that by helping others she could somehow begin to heal the wounds she had inflicted. But in a tragic twist, Nicole's promises of redemption turned out to be hollow. Less than 5 years after her release, Nicole Flagg, as she now went by, became involved in another violent crime that shocked everyone who knew her. According to the official reports, on the night of April 9, 2015, Nicole Flagg found herself being kicked out by her partner Ramon after dropping her off at her mother's apartment. Ramon handed her $150, and with nowhere to turn, Nicole reportedly spent the night alone in the woods. Early the following morning, on April 10, Nicole reached out to a friend, Mr. Barwick, asking for a ride. When Barwick arrived, Nicole appeared at her mother's apartment, carrying her mother's cell phone and credit cards. She claimed she had taken them while someone had been doing laundry in the building. Barwick drove her to a place on Betts Avenue where Nicole sold the phone in exchange for cocaine. Later that morning, a neighbor reported seeing Nicole outside smoking a cigarette and talking on the phone around 1:30 in the afternoon. Nicole told Barwick that she was leaving on foot to catch a bus, and at that time she said her mother was fine. However, instead of traveling far, Nicole got off the bus early and met up with a drug dealer. She ended up back at a friend's house where she used the money she had stolen from her mother to get high. That same day, Nicole's mother, Mervinia, who had been scheduled to begin her shift at 3:00 in the afternoon, didn't show up for work or call in. This was completely out of character for her, and friends and co-workers began calling concerned their calls went unanswered. And even her voicemail greeting had been changed to rap music, an unsettling detail that raised red flags among those who knew her. By April 11, suspicions surrounding Venia's whereabouts were escalating, Nicole attempting to cover her tracks began making calls. She asked Barwick to get rid of the stolen phone, fearing it might be tracked that same day. She mowed Roman's lawn and stayed inside, trying to avoid drawing attention to herself. Meanwhile, neighbors reported hearing arguing and shouting coming from Ravenia's apartment, although the timeline was unclear due to communication issues. The most disturbing details, however, came the following day on April 12 at precisely 12:37 in the morning. Maurice Allen Van's son called the police to request a welfare check after he was unable to get in touch with his mother. When officers arrived, they found the door to the apartment locked and the apartment itself eerily silent. Upon entering, they discovered Venia's lifeless body. She had been brutally stabbed and partially covered in bleach. An apparent attempt to erase both the evidence and the guilt. Investigators immediately began piecing together the timeline, and by that same day Nicole was brought in for questioning. Her phone was seized, and by evening police had recovered Van's stolen phone, beginning to make connections between Nicole and the crime. Just over a week later, on April 23, 2015, Nicole Flagg was arrested and charged with the murder of her mother. The motive for the crime was chillingly simple: robbery driven by Nicole's addiction. The woman who had once called Venia mom had stolen from her, taken her life, and tried to cover up her actions with chemicals and lies. What made this case even more disturbing was the fact that Nicole kept insisting on her innocence despite overwhelming evidence pointing to the opposite. She even denied putting bleach on the victim. Yet the official reports told a chilling story. The victim was found lying on the kitchen floor in a twisted position. Her face was almost planted face down on the floor, though her body was on her right side. Her legs were crossed near the ankle and her hair was tied into a ponytail held by a silver barrette. She was dressed in jeans and long johns which had been pulled down to her hip bone. Over her torso she wore a plaid shirt turned inside out with a second shirt underneath it. She had no shoes or socks. Blood was visible on both the top and bottom of her feet, a haunting detail that added to the growing list of unsettling signs. The blood splatter was not confined to just the victim, it was visible all over the kitchen: the sink, stove, microwave stand, a dinner plate on the table, kitchen curtains, and even the stereo stand and its knob all bore evidence of the violence that had unfolded. It was clear that she had been drenched in bleach. Her clothes were stained and the pungent odor of bleach filled the air underneath her. Two clear plastic bags lay, and when removed a pool of bleach was visible on the floor. The door under the kitchen sink was left ajar, and a black and white lunch bag still with a sandwich inside sat on the counter next to a tomato with a knife stabbed into it. Another strange detail was a drawer of the victim's dresser that was open, containing nothing but underwear and bras. To further emphasize the crime scene's grim reality, special lighting was used to highlight areas where bleach had been poured or used to wipe down walls, including places where bleach had been touched. As the coroner's office collected evidence, it was found that medicine had been taken from the microwave area of the kitchen. Dr. Earlman arrived at the scene prior to the autopsy with detectives Kenneth Gregory and Cara Gulf attending the autopsy. Later on, the autopsy revealed a horrific scene. The victim had suffered 11 stab wounds to her back. Most were superficial, but a few were deep, particularly one located on her upper left side. These stab wounds, striking from right to left, suggested the attacker was likely right-handed. In addition to the stab wounds, there were scratch marks on her right breast area and under her jawline, as well as cuts inside both her upper and lower lips. A scratch which seemed to start at her eyebrow and ran down her face to her mouth was also found. The injuries didn't stop there. She had a deep stab wound behind her right ear, another large cut to her right ear, and a stab wound to the right side of her neck. Most disturbingly, a defensive wound was found on her right middle finger. Other strange details began to emerge. The victim's house keys, car keys, and cell phone were missing, and no money or credit cards were found in the house. The only thing left on her person was a gold necklace, a tragic reminder of her life before this brutal attack. A rape exam was conducted by the Coroner further compounding the horror, the victim's car, a maroon Hyundai Accent, was towed for processing. It didn't take long before palm prints and a right index fingerprint belonging to Nicole Flagg were found on the outside of the driver's side door. This was significant, especially considering that the weather during the week of the homicide was stormy, with the first decent day being on the 10th of April. Additionally, Denanisha Gooden's left thumbprint was located on the rear window of the car. Nicole Flagg's story started to unravel. During a taped interview, she claims she took the bus to her mother's house on Friday morning, arriving at 11 a.m. She said her boyfriend left for work around 6 a.m. and that she spent the day at her mother's house doing her mother's hair and flat ironing it. She mentioned bringing her 2 joints with her and then leaving at around 1 to 10 a.m. She claimed to have caught a bus at 1:41 p.m. and got off at Seymour near Cincinnati Gardens to meet her friend Lo at the Saco. After buying $40 worth of crack, she was dropped back off at her boyfriend's house. There she brushed her teeth, put in eye drops, and said that she knew her mom keeps everything in her bra. She also mentioned calling her mom around noon on Saturday, though there was no clear answer from her mother. This interview, along with her odd claims, left investigators suspicious. Pictures of a scratch on Nicole's hand were taken by Officer Gormley and a DNA swab was collected from her. Her phone was seized and held for later examination. Interviews with others close to Nicole, including Betty Swan, Candy Loudermilk, and Aaron Tate, helped to piece together a clearer picture. Detective Connect contacted Lo, who later admitted to receiving a cell phone from Nicole, which led to more inconsistencies in Nicole's version of events. As more information came in, investigators learned that Nicole had been in contact with various people the day before the murder, including Lo, whose cell phone records confirmed their interactions. Her phone also contains several disturbing messages, including a text sent in the early hours of April 10, where she mentioned being at her mom's house, and then later sent messages regarding her whereabouts and actions. A search warrant for Lo's phone revealed even more inconsistencies in Nicole's story. By April 21, Nicole's story had completely unraveled, and she was arrested and charged with aggravated murder after confessing to the crime during a second interview. As investigators continued to gather evidence, a search of Nicole's apartment revealed more damning details, including socks stained with bleach and a pocket knife belonging to Nicole that had been hidden in her mother's bathroom. Her past relationship with her mother, as well as her history of manipulation and theft, began to emerge as key factors in the crime. This would soon lead to a final tragic revelation, one that would forever haunt those who knew her. As of now, Nicole Flagg was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Identified as inmate number W097334, she is serving a life sentence, along with an additional 15 years for aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. Crimes that added to the gruesomeness of the case and revealed a deeper level of planning and disregard for human life. Despite her repeated claims of innocence, the evidence was undeniable. Her fingerprints and DNA were found at the crime scene, directly contradicting her story. Prosecutors presented a strong case, painting a picture of a daughter who was not only manipulative but also driven by addiction and desperation. The courtroom was filled with emotion as Judge Stephen Martin, under docket number B1502-174, handed down the sentence in Hamilton County, Ohio. The judge didn't hold back, emphasizing the brutality of the act and the utter betrayal of maternal trust. Flagg showed little remorse during the trial, and many described her demeanor as cold and detached. Her legal team's appeals have so far been unsuccessful, and the court documents now public detail the extensive efforts made by law enforcement and forensic experts to bring the truth to light. Today, Nicole remains behind bars with no hope for freedom, her name forever tied to one of Ohio's most disturbing family murders. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at MR Nightcare True Crime Stories. Remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.